there are thousands of people who would buy what it is that you're selling if only they knew that you existed. Let me say that again. There are thousands of people in this world of 8 billion people who would happily buy your products and services if only they knew that you existed. That's straightforward, right? It sounds easy. But we make it harder and harder on ourselves to accomplish that goal because we may be making one or all of these 7 biggest mistakes, stopping your podcast from growing as best as it can and reaching those people and then converting those people into your dream clients. I'll be going through all those 7 pieces in this video. My name is Paul Stennett, and I run a podcast agency called Amazing Gains with my wife, Alexandra, here in Kingston, Jamaica, and we serve clients all over the world to help them to grow their shows and leverage their shows to get traffic and clients for their businesses. Mistake number 1 is that you're not recording video for your podcast. You know, people say podcast is just audio and they may go about their lives thinking that, and they can, but you don't want to make the mistake. You want to be making video for your show. And why is that? Well, there's a podcast that I found a few years ago. It's my favorite podcast. And I would not have found this podcast and falling in love with this podcast if I didn't first see a clip of their show on YouTube. It was My First Million show. And one of the hosts, Sean Puri, was interviewing Hassan Minhaj. Yes, he was interviewing comedian Hassan Minhaj on his podcast. And I found that conversation to be deep and funny and just a different approach than I've ever experienced with an interview of that nature. And I became hooked to the podcast from that point. And that podcast, when I saw it, was 3 years in. So if I didn't find it on video, and this is the experience that most of your clients are going to feel as well, they're going to be left out if you are not creating video to meet them where they are. And not only is video a good place to pick up people who may not be looking on the podcast apps, but it in itself is an engine for growth. Just the whole YouTube algorithm as a whole, and using long form content to drive audiences to your products and services. So you're making a big mistake if you're not using video. The next thing is your podcast concept is trash. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're not growing, it could be because your podcast concept is not built properly. Now let's take a look at it. Let's break it down. I'm going to give you a solution here. So there are 4 pieces that make up a great podcast concept. And if you have all these 4 pieces, or these 3 or 4, 2 or 3, if you have 1 is good, 2 is 3, 2 is good, 3 is better, 4 you're golden. If you have all 4, you're definitely going to have a podcast that's going to shoot out of the starting blocks. Let's break down what those 4 are. 1 is you as a host has insider access. What is it that you know that most people don't know, but they want to know about? When you take a look at podcasts like All In, they are already multi-billionaires, multi-millionaires, and they have insider access to what it is like working inside some of the largest tech companies in the world, some of these unicorns. They have insider access to the VC space, working in Sequoia Capital, working with all the top VCs where all the money is changing hands to these tech companies. They also have insider access to the political sphere, what's happening in the macroeconomic and the geopolitical state, or state of the world. They have insider access to that. And then they can expose that to us, much like Prometheus in Greek mythology, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings. They have that insider access. And you need to think about yourself as well. What Prometheus-like tendencies or abilities do you have that you can expose to a wider audience who would be very interested to hear that? 2 is, what are you as a host? What are your qualifications? All of our customers are health coaches. And these health coaches have experienced their own personal transformations, having suffered from a chronic pain or disease or illness that they themselves have now transformed and are taking that insider qualification of having gone through it themselves and healed themselves from that, and then exposing that now to an audience of people who are also similarly where they were struggling as well. So what qualifies you to talk about this topic that you're talking about? What about the audience niche? What is the audience type that you're going after? Are you going after people in the creator space? Are you going after tech founders? Are you going after people who are financially chained and want to become financially independent? Are you going after married couples who are struggling with their relationship issues? Like, what is the niche that you're going after? It must be very defined niche, and that niche needs to have a problem. It doesn't make sense to make a podcast about a niche that's not struggling at all, right? You're not going to get any listeners. And fourth, what is the show format? Everybody knows, if you don't know, you can check it out. Everybody knows Hot Ones. There's Drink Champs. They're different. There are different unique formats. So if you're just thinking, I'm just going to go ahead and grab a friend of mine and we're going to sit on a couch and talk, you may be going down the wrong path, right? You may be just throwing your podcast on a heap of millions of two white dudes sitting on a couch talking about stuff, right? So what is it that you're doing as a format that could be differentiated? It could be short form. Maybe you can do short videos, really fast-paced interviews. You could do longer form, Joe Rogan style, 2 hours, 3 hours. You could do somewhere in the middle. You can do the longer form when there's something in there that's able to grab people's attention, besides just you talking, kind of like Hot Ones where you're ramping up the difficulty for each question. Like, think about what format that you can apply to the show. And when you pair the format with the audience niche, with your qualifications, with your insider access, put those together, and you have a format, a content, a concept for a podcast that has legs and can really, really pick up listeners very, very quickly. Now, the third mistake that you're probably making is that you didn't plan your launch effectively. You may have just got up and said, I'm going to do a podcast. And so you take your podcast, you put it out there, and it's done, right? But if you don't take the time to plan, say people who fail to plan to fail, if you don't actually plan and execute a launch plan, you're setting up yourself for failure. No, you already launched your podcast, it's fine. If you're not growing at this point, you can do a relaunch. Just like, you may have heard the story of Airbnb. Those guys, Brian Chesky and those guys, they launched Airbnb multiple times and through different iterations. And every time that they failed, they would come up with another idea, a new event, and they'd launch again until they went to the DNC, the Democratic National Convention. And they said, we're going to launch again for this event. This is after they've launched several times before. And that is what actually started the traction for them and actually made the difference out of all the previous launches, is tying their business to that event. So think about, you can always relaunch. Now, what goes into the relaunch? You want to get people to cross the picket line. You want people to cross a line. You want people who can support your launch and can commit to your launch. And they can only do that once they've committed themselves to it. So don't just passively say, hey, I'm launching the podcast. You want people who are willing to show up for you, participate for you, do what needs to be done for the launch for you. What needs to be done for the launch is you're going to need people to share it. You're going to need people to talk about it. You're going to need conversations happening in rooms where you're not at by the people who can support your podcast for you. So you need that. You also need ratings and reviews, and a lot of them as well, to really push your podcast up the ranks. So go out there publicly, announce you're doing a relaunch or a launch, get people to raise their hands so they say that they want to be a part of it, and really build a relationship with them. They are your insiders. They are your ride or dies. They are your street team. Treat them as such. They become a part of your inner circle, and really give them as much as you can in terms of what's happening behind the scenes of your show. New guests that you're talking to, here are clips of the episode that you're working on. Here's new artwork that we've done. What do you think about this? Get them really involved and excited for the process. And then when you have that launch date come, get them to share, get them to rate and review. All right, just giving you that. That's like thousands of dollars worth of secrets right there. Anyways, we keep moving. The fourth mistake that you're probably making is that you're not showing up on multiple platforms. Maybe just have your podcast on Apple, Spotify, etc., and you have your podcast up on YouTube. Hopefully you have a video, you're doing video, you have your podcast up on YouTube. That's not enough. There are several ways that you can leverage all of that information to grow even more, right? First of all, You need to have your podcast on your website. That's a basic thing. Get your podcast up on your website. You need to have your you could be making short form clips for Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok. Those platforms, those fast-paced platforms, are meant to get you a maximum amount of attention. People are going to find those clips, be interested in what you have to say, come back and listen to your long-form podcast. Just put them out there. Even if you may not be good at them right now, but just start putting them out there. Work on getting better at your hooks and your titles and the length of your clips, and it's gonna grow. And people are gonna come from that. You want to be doing that to gain that attention. You also want to think about doing long form clips as well. A lot of podcasts that I listen to, as I mentioned before, with My First Million podcast, a lot of podcasts that I listen to, I first found them through like a nice 5 to 15 minute clip. I didn't have the time to go through the entire episode to find a nugget, but they extracted that nugget for me. They said, you know what, we believe that a large amount of people will be interested in just this piece of the conversation. Let me put that piece of conversation out there. And I found it, I was hooked on it, and that's how I became a listener of the podcast. There are lots of podcasts right now that I would never sit down and listen to a full episode, but I can say that I'm a fan of the podcast and I will support them in any way that I can because of the clips that I listen to and that I watch on YouTube. So, short form clips, longer form clips, put those up on YouTube as well, not just the full length episode, but also clips from that episode. And you need to be also leveraging Twitter and LinkedIn. Like if you are a business podcast and you're not on LinkedIn, what are we doing? We got to talk about it. You need to be getting on LinkedIn as well, like posting your clips, posting both your long form and your short form clips onto LinkedIn, but also making posts, relevant posts that talk about each bullet point or each main point of the podcast should be its own post that goes up onto those platforms with a link in the comments to go back and check out the episode. Same link for Twitter. Put something in in a second thread that links people back to the podcast, but really deliver on what the main on a main point per thread, right? Leveraging Twitter and LinkedIn. Think about it this way. Your customers are everywhere, right? We don't know where they are. It's your job to between you and your customer, you have a 50% responsibility. Your half of the responsibility is to create good content and put it up everywhere it possibly can be. Do whatever you can. You cannot physically go through the internet and grab someone and make them watch the video. That is their job. It's their job to see your podcast episode or your clip, see that it has something in there that it is connected to a problem that they have in their life or a question that they have open in their mind, and then go through, watch that piece of content, and then come back and become a customer of yours. So as long as you're doing your half of the process, meaning you're creating good content and you're making it available everywhere it possibly can be, your half is done. The rest of the other half will be taken care of by itself. Think about it in that way and go forward, please. And just show up everywhere you possibly can. The next thing, this point 5, I believe, is you are not leveraging your guests very effectively to grow your show. If you have a podcast, you should be talking to guests. I know some people who don't, that's fine for them. But if you want to grow really quickly, you want to be talking to guests. You want to be having guests on your show. Why? Because you want guests, you want to leverage the guest's audience. You want to leverage the goodwill that the guest has brought onto your show and siphon their audience, but also siphon their audience and bring them back into your show, right? You also want to show your audience and your future audience who are going to come and find you that you are someone who's able to curate these conversations. You're able to acquire these guests onto your show and bring forth actually a really good conversation. So there are many benefits to having a guest, but most people do it ineffectively, right? What they do is they have the guest down like a revolving door. Come on, guest, sit down, talk, answer these questions. Okay, goodbye. And that creates an atmosphere, an attitude where the guest is just not interested. It's not interested in you, not interested in your show. And so you lose like 50% of the benefit of having them on your show. You want them to love your show love the conversation and share your conversation that you had with them with their audience and with the world. And if you had a revolving door and you don't really care about building a relationship, you won't do that. So spend time to build a relationship with the guest. In the pre-screening, definitely do a pre-screening if you haven't doing one. Pre-screening, in the post-interview, really build a relationship and find some way in which you can connect with them in the future. Maybe you're going to follow them. Maybe you both are going to join a group or do something together, WhatsApp group, and communicate that way. But don't just leave it off. Find a way to build a relationship with them over time. And then when your episode goes live, they will happily, trust me, it works like gangbusters. They will happily share your podcast with the world. And that's what you want. You also want to think about doing a guest host swap. Maybe it's a smaller podcast, a podcast that's a peer to yours. So they may not have a massive audience, but they have an audience. They have an audience that they're talking to. You can have them on your show and you can be on their show and swap that way. And, you can introduce yourself to their audience and they can introduce themselves to your audience. It's a good way to get to grow as well. You can also think about doing paid podcast shoutouts. So you look for bigger podcasts in your niche, or if they're not directly in your niche, they serve an audience that is adjacent to your niche, maybe a wider audience. Let's say, for example, I'm talking to coaches and consultants. There may be a larger business podcast that has that my audience as a subset of theirs, that I can pay them for them to shout out my podcast. And host shoutouts are massive. People trust hosts with their lives and with their money, right? They really build that relationship and build an affinity with the host. And so for the host to shout you out is a very good indicator that they believe that you can siphon off that trust for yourself. So pay them for a shout out. They would send that traffic to your show. You're gonna get a nice bump from that as well. All right, 2 more. The 6th thing that you're not doing, the mistake that you're making, is that you're not building an email list. An email list is like a virtual cycle, right? You grow your podcast, you get listeners in, you want to retain them in another medium. In some instances, podcasts is like sand, right? A listener might come into your podcast and you'll never know who they are, right? Until you decide to give them a call to action and they take and actually do something else. And so in order for us to capture the sand, we need to have an email list. We need to have something that we can own. That's not social media where followers can be taken from us, but an email list, right? So give people a call to action to build your email list. And that way, you can then say, if they may have missed your episode 1 week on their podcast platform, where maybe they didn't go on YouTube that week, or maybe they didn't open their podcast up, they're very busy, you have them on the email list to say, hey, an episode came out that you may have missed, you gotta check it out. And there's the same rule that applies to what I said about LinkedIn and Twitter. You wanna give people multiple reasons to listen to your show within the week your episode is out. So the common practice is people would make one post to their email list that says, hey, spoke to this person, we spoke about this, listen to the show. That way is not very effective anymore for getting readers on your email list to become listeners. So think about how can you extract the main points. And maybe you have 3 or 5 main key threads that happen in your podcast. Each one of those threads is an email that you delve into. And then that will get people to open loops in their mind or create FOMO, give them a reason to want to check out the full episode. All right? Are you following that? Cool. So just to recap, you want your podcast to siphon people somewhere that you can see who they are, you can know more about them. And that is that you own, and that is your email list. And then you want to use your email list then now to push people back to the podcast. You have that cycle going back between the podcast and the email. Because really, and I can't believe I haven't said this before, the podcast is the main place where you're building the relationship. You're turning someone who's a cold person on the sidelines to someone who's ravingly excited about you and your show. This is the playbook has been played multiple times. This is how I myself have become a raving fan of several businesses through this process of listening to their podcasts. And finally, this last thing is you're not using your website effectively. Your website is your hub where you can drive all of your potential clients, and putting your podcast on your website is a great place to get additional SEO. One of my clients recently mentioned that she stopped posting blog posts on her website about 6 months ago. What's been keeping her ranking at the top of Google has been just posting about her podcast on her website. So we write the show notes, we put the video and the audio player on and the show notes on the website as a blog post. And then that goes out and gets her SEO traffic. It's huge. And the benefit is people who are coming through SEO traffic can become podcast listeners, but also you can retarget them and serve them up with different ads about your products and services across the internet using retargeted. So very powerful. I hope that you're not making any of these same mistakes. If you are, I've given you the keys with how to unlock them. Let me know how that goes. And feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this, like this video, and subscribe for more. All right, take care.